Zero. Not one, not two, 0 free throws. In a game her team led by 12 points on the road against one of the best teams in the league, the most dangerous scorer in the history of women's basketball never once got fouled hard enough to walk to the line. And when the final buzzer sounded and the Indiana Fever had turned a 12-point lead into an 8-point loss, the coach responsible for the game plan walked straight to the podium and said it herself. They couldn't get Caitlin loose. She knew. The whole room knew. Every person watching at home knew, and yet somehow that confession didn't come with a resignation letter, a new play drawn up on a whiteboard, or even a serious promise that anything was about to change. It came with a microphone, a press conference, and 3 days until the next game. Think about what that number actually means for a second. 0. When was the last time you watched a scorer of Caitlin Clark's caliber play a full professional basketball game and never once get sent to the charity stripe? This isn't a player who is passive. This isn't a player who floats around the perimeter and waits for spot-up threes. This is a woman who averaged more assists than most point guards in the league while simultaneously being one of the most feared offensive weapons on the floor every single night. She draws contact, she initiates contact. She has built her entire career, all the way back through college, through the record books, through every highlight reel you've ever seen, around attacking downhill and making defenders pay for standing in her way. And on Saturday night, the Indiana Fever ran a game plan that made all of that irrelevant. 0 free throws isn't just a stat, it's a symptom. And the disease has been spreading for weeks now. Quietly at first, then louder, then so loud that you couldn't sit in that arena or watch that broadcast and pretend you didn't hear it. The best player in the building spent the night parked in the corner, hands empty, watching her teammates run an offense that had no idea what to do with her. And what makes it all so much more infuriating, what gives this whole situation a bitter edge that won't go away, is that the person who designed that offense stood up in front of cameras and described the problem better than any analyst on television. Stephanie White saw it. She said it. And then the next possession happened. That's where this story starts. Not with a bad game, not with a rough shooting night, not with one of those things that happens in a long season and gets forgotten by the next week. This is something else. This is a pattern. And patterns in professional sports don't fix themselves. They get addressed or they get worse. The Fever are staring down that fork in the road right now, with a sold-out building waiting on Thursday, a fan base that has already started asking questions nobody in that front office wants to answer, and a generational talent who is running out of runway to prove what everyone already knows she can do. Here's how we got here. Let's go back to Saturday and actually walk through what happened, because the final score tells you almost nothing. Indiana walked into that building as the away team, but played like the home team for most of the first half. They were moving the ball, they were competing on the defensive end, and by the time the third quarter was well underway, they had opened up a 12-point lead on the road against a New York Liberty team that was already missing Sabrina Ionescu. Let that sit for a second. New York, one of the elite rosters in the entire WNBA, was short-handed. Their floor general wasn't available. Indiana had every reason in the world to go out there and put a stranglehold on that game. Instead, they let it slip. And they didn't just let it slip quietly in some kind of slow, grinding way that you could chalk up to fatigue or tough circumstances. New York closed the third quarter on 10-0 run. Nothing. Indiana scored nothing while New York rattled off 10 straight points and completely rewrote the momentum of the game in under 3 minutes. Then the fourth quarter arrived, and it was over before it really even started. The Liberty outscored Indiana 29-18 in the final period. An 8-point loss that started as a 12-point win got turned inside out, and Indiana never found a way to answer it.
Now, here's the number that cuts through all the noise and tells you exactly what was happening on the floor. 11. That is how many layups Indiana missed on Saturday night. Not difficult mid-range jumpers, not contested threes, layups. Shots at the rim where the math is supposed to be in your favor, where the whole point is to put yourself in a position where the defense can't stop you. 11 of those missed. And Stephanie White counted them herself after the game. She brought them up voluntarily at the podium, which tells you something about how much it was weighing on her. The two players who were supposed to anchor Indiana's offensive identity, Aaliyah Boston and Kelsey Mitchell, the two highest-paid players on that roster outside of Clark, combined to shoot 15 for 36. That's not a bad shooting night in the conventional sense. That's a collapse. 15 for 36 from two players who are being paid to be reliable offensive options on a night when the Fever desperately needed someone to step up and provide consistency is the kind of performance that changes the entire conversation about what this team is and what it's capable of. And here's the part that genuinely should have everyone in that organization losing sleep. The one Fever player who couldn't miss on Saturday night was Monique Billings, 6 of 7 from the bench. She was locked in. She was playing with confidence and finishing everything she touched. And she's the one player the offense isn't designed around. She's the one player who wasn't given a system built to get her open looks and favorable positions. She just went out there and made things happen within whatever space existed. And she was the best offensive performer Indiana had all night. Think about what that tells you about the system itself. The players it's built around struggled. The player it isn't built around thrived. That's not random. That's information. Meanwhile, the most magnetically talented offensive player on the floor was operating out of the corner, functioning as a passer and a decoy, recording 9 assists and going 2 for 8 inside the arc. The ball wasn't in her hands. The plays weren't being run through her reads. The defense wasn't being forced to account for her in the ways that make her genuinely impossible to guard. She was doing everything she could within the constraints of a system that kept pushing the ball somewhere else every time she touched it. This is what 11 missed layups looks like when you trace it back to its roots. It isn't a finishing problem. It isn't a conditioning problem. It's a design problem. When your point guard, your most gifted decision maker, the player who reads defenses faster than anyone else on the court, is being kept away from the ball and asked to clear space instead of create, the whole machine starts grinding. Teammates are getting into positions without the setup they need. The timing is off. The rhythm is off. And when the rhythm is off, layups start clanking off the back of the rim, and a 12-point lead turns into an 8-point loss in the span of about 14 minutes. Saturday wasn't a fluke. It was the same movie with the same ending, just at a higher volume. 9 assists, 4 made shots out of 14 attempts, 0 free throws. Read those numbers again and then ask yourself what they describe. That isn't a bad night for a scorer. A bad night for a scorer looks like 7 points, a few turnovers, some tough shots that didn't fall, and a team that still found ways to get her involved. What those numbers describe is something closer to a job description, a role that was handed to Caitlin Clark whether she asked for it or not. She was the passer Saturday. She was the facilitator. She was the player whose job was to touch the ball at the top of the floor, survey the defense, find the open teammate, and then get out of the way while someone else tried to score. 9 assists is a genuinely impressive number. On any other night, from any other player, you'd look at that stat line and say that person had a significant impact on the game. But context matters more than raw numbers, and the context here is brutal. Those 9 assists came while Clark was being systematically prevented from doing the things she does better than almost anyone who has ever played this game. She wasn't setting up teammates because she was thriving in a playmaking role that suited her. She was setting up teammates because the alternative, getting her open for shots, getting her downhill against the defense, getting her to the free throw line where she's almost automatic, apparently wasn't available to her.
2 for 8 inside the arc. That's the number that really twists the knife. Clark has always been a player who can operate from everywhere on the floor. Her range is genuinely absurd, and she's proven capable of making shots from positions that most players wouldn't even attempt. But the most efficient offense in basketball is built around players attacking the rim, drawing contact, converting at the line, and using that aggression to open up everything else. When Clark goes 2 for 8 inside the arc, when she's getting those positions and can't finish, or isn't getting them at all, something has gone badly wrong. And 0 free throws. We keep coming back to that number because it's the one that most clearly communicates what was happening. You earn free throws by attacking. You earn free throws by being aggressive with the ball in your hands, by forcing defenders to make decisions at full speed and make contact when they can't get out of the way in time. Clark's entire identity as a scorer is built on exactly that kind of aggression. She has been doing it since she was in high school. She did it throughout her college career in ways that rewrote the record books. She arrived in the WNBA with a reputation as one of the most dynamic attacking guards the sport had ever seen. On Saturday night, she didn't get fouled once. That's not something that happens by accident when the offense is functioning properly. When Clark has the ball in her hands and is operating within a system that uses her skills the way they're supposed to be used, defenders have to make desperate choices to stop her. Fouls happen, contact happens, the line gets visited. 0 trips to the line in a game her team led by 12 is a statistical record of a player being kept away from the situations that define her. It's a receipt. The offense generated it, printed it out, and then Stephanie White walked to the podium and read it back to the press like she was surprised by what it said. Here's the thing about Clark's role in all of this that deserves a little more credit than it's been getting. She didn't pout. She didn't check out. She recorded 9 assists because she was working within the system, finding her teammates, doing the collaborative thing, even when the system wasn't doing the collaborative thing for her. That level of professionalism while producing that kind of box score in a loss that the Fever had in their hands and gave away requires a kind of mental toughness that doesn't always get acknowledged. But professionalism has limits, and talent has to be used or it gets wasted. The crowd that made the Indiana Fever the hottest ticket in the league didn't fill Gainbridge Fieldhouse night after night to watch Caitlin Clark record 9 assists from the corner. They came to see the version of her that makes defenses panic, the version that pulls up from 30 feet, the version that throws passes that leave defenders flat-footed and then attacks the opening before anyone can react. They came to watch her cook. On Saturday, she wasn't allowed in the kitchen. Here's where the story gets genuinely complicated, because if Stephanie White had walked to that podium and said the right things were happening, if she had defended the game plan and argued that the execution just wasn't there, this would be a simple story about a coach protecting her system. But that's not what happened. What happened was more uncomfortable than that. White stood up in front of cameras and reporters and described the problem with the kind of clinical precision that you'd expect from an analyst who had spent 3 days breaking down film. She talked about New York's length. She said in almost exactly these words that they couldn't get Caitlin loose very much at all, and that they had to find better ways to do that. She admitted the team got impatient. She admitted that they didn't help Clark the way she needed to be helped. She even laid out the rim problem by the numbers: top of the league in attempts at the basket, near the bottom of the league in converting them. Every single word of that diagnosis was accurate. Every piece of it was true, and every piece of it was also a description of a problem that Stephanie White has the power and the authority and the professional obligation to fix. She hasn't. A coach who can't identify what's wrong is a coach with an information problem. You can fix an information problem. You study more film, you bring in better assistants, you talk to the players and find out what they're seeing from the floor. An information problem has solutions, but a coach who identifies the problem perfectly, states it publicly in front of the entire league, and then walks back out onto the court running the same things that produced the problem in the first place, that's a different situation entirely. That's not a coaching problem. That's a commitment problem.
White clearly sees what's happening to Clark within this offense. She understands that the system isn't getting her open. She understands that a generational scorer going 0 for 0 at the free throw line in a competitive game represents a catastrophic failure of offensive design. She understands that the Fever had New York on the ropes and then ran out of answers when New York made adjustments, specifically because the most dangerous weapon on the floor wasn't being used as a weapon. She understands all of it, and then she draws up the next play. There's a phrase that applies here with uncomfortable precision. A diagnosis without a prescription isn't medicine. In a press conference setting, in a professional sports context, when the diagnosis is delivered without any apparent plan to act on it, it stops being accountability and starts being something else. It starts being cover. It becomes a way to preempt criticism by acknowledging the problem loudly enough that people feel like something is being addressed, while the actual behavior that's creating the problem remains unchanged. After a while, a diagnosis that never produces a prescription isn't honesty, it's an alibi. The most searing part of this whole situation is that White didn't just name the Clark problem in vague terms, she got specific. She used phrases like "very much at all" to describe how rarely they were getting Clark into comfortable offensive positions. She counted the missed layups herself. She broke down New York's defensive scheme and explained what it did to Indiana's spacing. This is a woman who is clearly engaged, clearly thinking, clearly not sleepwalking through her job. She knows what she's watching, she knows what she's coaching, which means the question isn't whether she sees it. She sees it. The question is why seeing it hasn't been enough to change it, and that question doesn't have a comfortable answer. Let's strip away everything subjective for a moment. Let's put aside the fan frustration, the social media noise, the press conference sound bites, and the narratives that build up around any star player on a struggling team. Let's just look at the cleanest, most objective piece of evidence available from Saturday night. Brianna Stewart shot 21 free throws. Caitlin Clark shot 0. The New York Liberty as a team went to the line 40 times. Indiana Fever as a team went 15. That's a 25-attempt difference in a game that Indiana led by 12 points in the third quarter. You want to understand how a 12-point lead becomes an 8-point loss? How a team that looks like the better side for 2.5 quarters suddenly falls apart completely? Start there. Start with the free throw disparity and work backwards to why it exists and what it tells you about how both teams were playing. Now, officiating is part of this conversation, and it has to be acknowledged. Clark herself was honest about it after the game, in a way that was actually more refreshing than anything her coach said at the podium. She admitted that a couple of her fouls were just dumb. "That's on me," she said. She took ownership of the mistakes that were hers to own, which is more than some veterans twice her age would have done in the same moment. So some of the disparity lives there, in some questionable calls and some avoidable mistakes on Indiana's end. But strip the officiating out of it entirely. Pretend every call was perfect. Pretend the refs were invisible. One fact remains, and it's the fact that the free throw line makes impossible to argue with. You don't draw fouls standing in the corner. You draw fouls with the ball in your hands. You draw fouls by attacking the lane, by putting defenders in positions where they have to choose between giving up a layup and reaching in hard enough to send you to the line. You draw fouls by being aggressive in the ways that Clark has been aggressive her entire career. You draw fouls by doing the things that Indiana's offense was not asking her to do on Saturday night. 0 free throws from Caitlin Clark isn't primarily a referee problem. It's a usage problem dressed up as a referee problem. When your best driver never gets to drive, when your most dangerous attacker is camped out at the three-point arc running actions for other people, the free throw line goes quiet. The line going quiet is not a symptom of bad calls. It's a symptom of a player not being used in the situations where she earns contact. Clark even joked about it after the game, said she hasn't shot a free throw all year. The room laughed. It was the kind of self-deprecating comment that a player makes when they're trying to keep things light, when they're trying not to say the thing that would make the next headline uncomfortable for everyone involved. She kept it funny, she kept it brief, she moved on.
But it isn't funny. Not when you understand what it means. Not when you trace the line from 0 free throws all the way back to the offensive design that produced them. Not when you understand that the player making the joke is the same player who has been watching her offensive opportunities evaporate week by week within a system that keeps announcing it needs to do better for her and then doing the same thing over again. When Brianna Stewart shoots 21 free throws and Caitlin Clark shoots 0 in the same game, that's not variance. That's not one of those random nights where the numbers just happen to fall oddly. That's an honest reflection of how much each player was being asked to attack, how much each player was being put in positions to create contact, and how differently each team was choosing to use their best offensive weapons. Stewart was in attack mode all night because New York's offense was built to put her in attack mode.
Clark was in the corner all night because Indiana's offense was built to put other people in attack mode. The free throw line is the most honest scoreboard in basketball. It doesn't care about intentions or press conference explanations. It just counts. There's a specific sound a fan base makes when it stops giving the benefit of the doubt. It's not quite anger yet. It's something more complicated than that. It's the sound of people who have been patient, who have been making excuses, who have been telling themselves that things will click eventually, finally running out of reasons to keep waiting. Indiana's fan base is making that sound right now. After Saturday, fire Stephanie White wasn't a fringe opinion buried in the corners of niche basketball forums. It trended, it spread, it showed up across every platform where people talk about basketball, in comment sections and reply threads and dedicated posts that accumulated thousands of interactions. The criticism wasn't coming from casual observers or people who had just discovered the team. It was coming from the people who know this roster, who follow every game, who turned the Indiana Fever into the most talked about team in the WNBA over the past year and a half. One fan summed it up as simply as anyone could. They took the CC out of CC. That's not a strategic critique or a detailed breakdown of offensive efficiency metrics. That's a fan saying in 6 words what the box score says in numbers and what the tape says in silence. Another one counted it out and arrived at a statistic that hits harder than almost anything else from that game. Caitlin Clark got a single shot in the 4th quarter, one, and it came with about a minute remaining after the game was already gone, when the result had already been decided and the damage had already been done. One shot in the 4th quarter of a game Indiana was leading in the 3rd. A third fan said something simpler than that, and maybe more devastating because of its simplicity. Nobody set anything up to get her open all night. That's it. That's the whole complaint. Not that Clark had a bad game, not that she made poor decisions or took the wrong shots or failed to show up mentally. That nobody was designing actions to free her, that nobody was running plays to create openings for her, that the entire offensive system spent 40 minutes finding ways to get everyone else the ball without ever making the opposition pay for what happens when Caitlin Clark has space and time and the basketball. These are fans talking, not a coaching staff, not an analytics department, not a league executive with an agenda. Fans who watch every game, who buy the tickets, who wear the jersey, who made this team matter in ways it hadn't mattered in years. And their frustration isn't rooted in unrealistic expectations or entitlement. It's rooted in watching someone genuinely special be used in ways that make her ordinary. But here's what the frustration is really pointing at, underneath all the noise. These are the same fans who turned the Indiana Fever into the hottest ticket in professional women's basketball. These are the people whose energy and engagement pushed everyone's salaries up, made the league's television numbers explode, brought national attention to a city and a team that had been largely ignored for years. They did that because they fell in love with a player, not a system, not a particular coaching philosophy, not a particular style of basketball that they had always dreamed of watching, a player, and they're watching that player get smaller every week. When a fan base that passionate, that invested, that consequential to the economic reality of the league starts producing trending hashtags about firing the head coach, it is not a group of people overreacting to a tough loss. It's a warning sign. It's people who have been paying attention longer than most, pointing at the thing that's getting worse and saying out loud that they see it and they aren't okay with it. Organizations that listen to those moments early can still course correct. Organizations that dismiss them as noise usually find out later, at significant cost, that the noise was a signal all along. The last part of this should scare the Fever organization more than anything else on this list. Fans aren't just frustrated. They're saying they're watching a player they love look miserable doing her job. If that's true, and anyone who watched Saturday with clear eyes would struggle to argue that it isn't, then the issue has moved well beyond a rough stretch of games. It has moved into territory where the emotional relationship between a franchise player and her own fan base starts to deteriorate.
And when that relationship deteriorates, things that felt solid start coming loose very quickly. This might seem like a detour. Stay with it because it connects. Back in 1957, there was a man named Walter O'Malley who owned the Brooklyn Dodgers. Not the Los Angeles Dodgers, the Brooklyn Dodgers, the team that Jackie Robinson played for. The team that had broken the color barrier in baseball just a decade before and had become one of the most beloved franchises in American sports in the process. Brooklyn had given everything to that team. The neighborhood bled it. People grew up with it. Generations of families had built their autumns around the schedule and the standings and the specific way it felt to belong to something that mattered. O'Malley spent months, publicly and loudly, telling Brooklyn that the team wasn't going anywhere. He said it in newspapers. He said it in meetings. He gave people reasons to believe him, because he was the person in charge, and in 1957, the person in charge was still someone people tended to trust. The fans believed him. They had no particular reason not to. Then he moved the franchise to Los Angeles. Brooklyn never got baseball back in the same way. The Dodgers are still there, obviously, in Los Angeles, thriving. But the original thing, the thing that made people in Brooklyn feel like they were part of something, that was gone permanently. And the wound didn't come from the move itself, not entirely. The wound came from the gap between what they were told and what was actually happening. The wound came from trusting the person in charge and watching that trust get used as a management tool, while the real decisions were being made elsewhere. The lesson from that story was never really about a city losing a team. Cities lose teams. It's painful, but it's recoverable. The real lesson was about what happens when the people running an organization develop a habit of saying one thing publicly and doing something else on the ground. When that habit takes hold, and when the fans start to recognize it, the trust that holds the relationship together starts cracking in ways that are very difficult to repair. Now bring that back to Indianapolis. Stephanie White keeps saying the right things. After every difficult game, at every podium, in every post-game interview, the words are exactly correct. We have to get her loose. We didn't help her. We have to be better. Those words are accurate, accountable, and self-aware. They are also, at this point in the season, starting to feel like a pattern of their own, a predictable pattern. A pattern where the right words get said after the wrong result, and then the next game tips, and the right words turn out not to have changed anything about how the game is being played. Nobody is accusing Stephanie White of deliberately deceiving her fan base the way O'Malley deceived Brooklyn. That's not the comparison. The comparison is about what happens over time when the gap between words and actions becomes large enough that people start paying more attention to the actions than the words. When that gap establishes itself, it doesn't matter anymore how clearly and honestly and correctly you diagnose the problem at the microphone, because the microphone is starting to feel like the performance and the court is starting to feel like the truth. Words are cheap when the tape says the same thing every single night. There's still time to close that gap. There's still time for the words and the actions to point in the same direction. But Thursday is coming fast, and the window keeps shrinking. Gainbridge Fieldhouse, Thursday night, sold out. The Indiana Fever come home after back-to-back road losses with a fan base that has watched 2 straight games of Caitlin Clark operating as a support player in her own offense, with a trending conversation about whether the head coach should still have her job, and with a Chicago Sky team waiting on the other side of the floor that will arrive with complete scouting information about exactly what Indiana is and isn't willing to do with the best player in the building. Chicago knows. Every team in this league knows. When a coach stands at the podium and explains out loud that her offense can't get its best player open, that isn't just news for the fans watching on television. That's a scouting report. That's an opponent circling a sentence in their prep materials and building a game plan around the fact that Indiana, for whatever combination of reasons, is not going to make you pay with Caitlin Clark unless you force their hand.
and Chicago will arrive Thursday with a very clear understanding of how hard they need to work to force that hand. Stephanie White has 3 nights and 1 decision. Option 1, put the ball back in Caitlin Clark's hands. Let the system bend toward the player instead of asking the player to bend toward the system. Trust that the person who averaged more points per game than almost anyone in the history of college basketball, who has been making impossible shots and impossible passes since before she was old enough to vote, knows how to operate when she's given space and freedom and the ball in her hands at full speed. Let the best player in the building be the best player in the building and see what happens when Gainbridge Fieldhouse watches Clark cook in the way they originally came to watch her cook. Option 2, run the same plan. Keep Clark in the corner, keep distributing the ball through other hands, keep running actions that leave her as a decoy, keep producing box scores that show 9 assists and 0 free throws and 2 for 8 from inside the arc. Keep walking to the podium afterward and diagnosing the results with pinpoint accuracy. Keep saying, we have to do better, we have to get her loose, we have to find better ways, and keep arriving at the next game, having not found them. Those are the 2 options. There isn't a third. The diagnosis is on the record now. The whole league heard it. Every team in the WNBA has access to the post-game transcript, where the Indiana Fever's head coach admitted publicly that her offense cannot free her best offensive player. That admission doesn't just describe Saturday night, it describes a strategic reality that opponents will continue to exploit until something about it changes. Until Stephanie White makes the change herself, or until someone above her in the organization decides the pattern has gone on long enough that external pressure is the only thing that's going to move it. What's riding on Thursday is bigger than a win or a loss. The Fever are not in a position in the standings where they can comfortably absorb another defeat, but that's almost secondary to the larger issue. What's riding on Thursday is whether the words that keep being said at the podium are going to finally mean something on the court, whether the diagnosis is going to produce a prescription for the first time, whether the coach who clearly sees exactly what's wrong is finally going to do something about it in a setting where doing something about it actually matters, which is to say, in the game itself, not in the press conference that follows. The sold-out crowd at Gainbridge Fieldhouse will know within the first few possessions. They'll see who has the ball, who's being freed up by the offense, who's being treated like the most dangerous player on the floor. They'll see whether Thursday looks like a response or a continuation, and they'll react accordingly with the kind of energy that either turns the place into a fortress or slowly, painfully starts to drain away. Clark has been professional through all of it. She's done her job within the constraints she's been given. She's made her teammates better even when the system wasn't making her better. She's shown the kind of character that makes people root for her beyond just the highlights. But professional patience has a ceiling. Talent that isn't being used has a way of making its frustration known, even when the player is keeping it carefully out of her voice in post-game interviews. The Indiana Fever have something genuinely rare on their roster. They have a player who changes the economics of a league, who sells out buildings by name, who makes casual observers into devoted fans and devoted fans into something closer to true believers. That kind of player comes along maybe once in a generation and maybe not even that often. What a franchise does with that player in the years when she's at her peak defines not just what the team accomplishes on the court, but what the organization becomes in the broader cultural conversation. Right now, in this specific moment, with Thursday approaching and the comment sections burning and the press conference transcript sitting there on the record for anyone to read, the Indiana Fever are at a crossroads that has a very clear right answer and a very clear wrong one. The question is whether the coach who already told the world she knows the difference is finally ready to act like it. Fix it or double down? That's what Thursday tells us. What do you think Stephanie White does when that first possession tips? Does she put the ball in Caitlin Clark's hands and let her play the game she was built to play? Or does she run the same action that leaves the most dangerous scorer in the building watching from the corner while someone else takes the shot? Drop it in the comments. The answer matters more than it usually does, because this time, the whole league is watching for it too.